So Daniel Davey, you're very welcome to the Bulletproof Dad podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm very, very well.
Daniel, I'm very excited to have you on here today for numerous reasons. But to get started, will you just do me a favor? And just in case someone listening to this doesn't exactly know who you are, could you just explain a little bit about yourself and your background and work you do?
Yeah, maybe I'll start off with the part that people don't know. I am a sheep farmer from Sligo. And that's true. It's true. And I'm holding on strong to that. My mother is looking after the farm at home in Sligo at the moment. And we have two early lambs that were surprises. I grew up in Sligo, small rural community. And I suppose the biggest thing growing up was I'm on a farm. My grandparents are growing their food in their garden. My granddads are milking their cows. My granny milking cows by hand. And the biggest thing in my life was football and farming. And very quickly, I suppose, I realized the value of food and health and food and performance. And all I ever wanted to do was to play football and to find out ways to impact performance.
Okay.
That's kind of the roots of my interest. And it kind of went from there.
So with improving performance, naturally you'll go to training and skill-based stuff on the pitch and maybe you do a bit of gym work. When did you realize that nutrition could play a big role in this?
At about the age of 7.
Okay.
I'm not
remember?
joking. Yeah, I can. Yeah. I actually can. There was a moment in my nanny's kitchen where there was a local footballer who was bigger and stronger and more athletic than everybody else. And he was like, everybody talked about Sean. And I looked at Sean. There was Sean Davey and there was Eamon O'Hara. They were the two superstars. And I remember asking my nanny if she would ask his mum, what did he eat?
Right.
Because I wanted to understand like that approach that he was taking. I was going to do it. And it's very fortunate. For some reason, it was just a part of our conversations at home. And it was a part of those initial understanding that things like eggs and milk and homemade bread and your bacon and cabbage played a vital role in being strong. And I think my granddad, I don't know if I actually connected this part before, but now that I even think about it, my granddad was an extremely strong man. So there's loads of stories about my dads or, neighbors would say, you need to get a digger to dig that line for the pipes.
Yeah.
And he would get a spade. Right. And he would dig.
Stuck in. Yeah. This your grandfather?
My granddad, yeah, Sonny Davey. And there was always that thing about how much turf you could bring in and, how much work you could get done. And very quickly, breakfast and lunch and dinner, or dinner was the middle of the day. Those type of things were very important to be able to do the work that you needed to do.
Yeah.
So from there, I suppose, again, the other thing that happened was in school, my dad worked in the local dairy. And when I was in school, in all summers, I was exposed to the production of dairy, milk to butter, milk to cheese, and that kind of connection between milk being produced locally on farms, then it being processed into foods. And I started to see all of those types of connections. And my dad was a fascinating man from the point of view that he was interested in farming, he was interested in health, he was interested in creativity in a lot of ways. So we're going back to the very, very early stages, but then it was like all I wanted to do was play football and play football really well. And from a very young age, now that I think back about it, I was running the roads and I was playing a lot of sport, like a lot of young people do. And food was on my radar.
From 7 years old, like that is quite unique to have it at like 7 years old. You're thinking about your next packet of crisps or your next fizzy drink or whatever for most people.
Yeah, and my mother tells a story about me sitting on a stool out the back of the house at 4 peeling potatoes.
Right, yeah.
So I just know it's not. It's now that you look back and you think it's a little bit unusual because of how different the world feels and looks now. But back then, we're talking about 36 years ago. there was still at that point in life, like food, there was you didn't take it for granted.
Yeah, I can somewhat relate. My father is actually from a small town in Tipperary, and they would have lived on a farm. But my grandfather was actually a builder. They had kind of like, they would have had land around that they leased out. So I remember going down as a child myself, and like from a young lad growing up in the housing estate in North County Dublin, this was a complete culture change. But I was very aware of it, and like that, it's just, I suppose, being exposed to nature, and it definitely does nurture you in certain ways. It go down a lot, whether it was holidays, school holidays, whatever. So I just imagine from a young age being immersed in that the whole time, it absolutely would have to have an impact on you and influence you. And I like, often I'll talk with lads here, and they'll go back to their childhood, and sometimes they're nearly apologetic about talking back because they think people are only interested in now in the current. But it's so important, because that's what definitely shapes us as we go forward. You know, it plays such a vital role. So from there, then, where would you have gone? So obviously, like, you've been surrounded by that growing up. When did it become clear to you that actually, not just from a sports performance point of view, but potentially as a career path here, that you could actually pursue something like this?
Well, I suppose there's a fork in the road for everybody, and you talked about your formative years. Well, school was incredibly challenging for me, and I just didn't fit into the bracket of being academic, or I certainly didn't think about myself like that. And I think that has to be put into the conversation, because when you're thinking about your career, ultimately it will be defined by how many points you get in your Leaving Cert. I just did not think I had the capability of getting points that would allow me to do the things that I was really interested in, which was either medicine or veterinary. Like that, they were the two things. I didn't have the confidence. I didn't have the belief. I didn't think I had the capability. So stepping back from that, there was a course called agricultural science that quite a number of people in even my family's network would have done, which is it was a really good next option. I didn't know where that was going to lead, but agriculture was something that I was interested in doing. But I remember going into that course, and it was a massive moment, because not only was I engaged in the topics, but the people. I mean, they were just incredible. From the point of view that there was a like-minded attitude towards fun, agriculture, food, but it was more than that. They knew how to have fun there was this sense of wanting to achieve great things, and everybody was ambitious, but there was a way that people went about it that was very supportive and inclusive. And I found school exclusive.
Yeah, it's the complete opposite.
It's the complete opposite.
Study? Where did you go to study?
UCD.
Cool. I actually went there myself.
Oh, brilliant.
And I found the same. It's kind of a weird thing, that cultural shift from going from school into college, where everyone's kind of nice and open-minded and well-greeting. It takes a very long time to get used to. I don't know whether I ever really got my head around it. And I know where you're coming from there. You obviously, so coming from Sligo, you obviously moved up and stayed up in UCD. I used to commute up and down. It was like an hour and a half every day, so I never fully got the experience. But with yourself, like, you were properly immersed in it. How many years were you there then?
4.
And so you see now the degree. You got the degree, did you?
I got the degree, and I got a lot of help even from my classmates. That was the big thing, I guess. When you were in secondary school, you were either in the smart group or you were in the group that just played football.
Yeah.
And
luckily you had the football. I was the same. Look, when you're good at sport, it helps a lot in school. It definitely helps. Yeah.
So school was challenging. College opened up my brain to a whole new set of possibilities, and that's when things got really exciting for me, and I felt like there was something in this, and it was as much about belief as anything else. I started to believe that this was a direction that I could do well in, and then there were subjects in there that were really specific about nutrition, and my best friend Brendan Egan was over in Loughborough doing sports nutrition, and I decided to go whatever direction. I decided to do whatever I could in UCD, in college. I ended up taking 4 extra modules just to put myself in a position to do a master's when I got out of that course. And that's what I did. And I got my degree, and then I went on to study nutrition in Bristol University.
Okay, how long did you go over there for?
That was just over a year.
Cool, yeah. So like, again, you travelled abroad. You were on it to go and get that. Now, You came straight back to Ireland after you got the degree, did you?
Well, not straight away, but yeah, I did a little bit of traveling. That's my only. This is much more personal. Just my only little regret was that I didn't see more of the world. I had always intended to live and work abroad, but I spent a bit of time in the UK and loved it. I played football over there for London for a year and played club football, and yeah, I loved my experience over there.
Yeah, a good few of my close mates lived in London for a few years, and I used to love going over. Just it's a different vibe completely. It's a really cool spot. When you move back to Ireland, then, like, I'm conscious there wouldn't be many, I suppose, job opportunities in the world of nutrition, especially like how many years ago are we talking here?
Yeah, it was 2008.
All right. Okay. So yeah. So again, there's probably, like, especially in sport as well, there's minimal jobs, and they tend to go to people who are maybe ex-players or like it's quite a small circle. When you came back and you tried then to look for work, what was your kind of natural pathway to get in to try and hack a career in nutrition, particularly performance nutrition and sports?
Yeah, I talk about this part of my life a lot, particularly the young people who might reach out and are interested in a career in sport or career in nutrition, because there were no opportunities and I was incredibly disillusioned. So what did I do? I had some contacts still in UCD in the High Performance Centre, and I went in there and I asked, could I do an internship or get some work experience? And the answer really was not really. They weren't going to bring, even though I had my master's done, they didn't really feel they had enough confidence in where I was at to give me the scope to go and work with athletes. That, the stakes were a bit too high. So I stayed in there just to be doing something while working in marketing jobs. So when I say marketing jobs, I mean I was getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to hand out fruit juice on Leeson Street Bridge in overalls, and wearing hats, daft hats, just to draw attention to what you're trying to give out. And then I went on, at the same time I was doing a course in exercise and health studies, and I did something called the Certified Strength and Conditioning qualification, because there were no jobs and there was no opportunities. At that time, there were, I think, 3 performance nutrition positions in the country.
Okay, yeah.
That was it.
For perspective, like.
Yeah, that was it. So you got the Irish rugby team, you've got the Irish Institute of Sport, and there was one in Leinster.
Okay.
And I remember thinking about, it was Emma McCrudden that was in Leinster at the time. And I was just like, that is the dream. But there was very, very, everything else was part-time. So I did whatever I possibly could for a while, just had conversations with people in the space, did loads of free nutrition work. I mean, going into schools and just speaking to friends and colleagues about nutrition for a long time. And then a job came up another marketing job came up. But eventually when things started to change when I got a role with a supplement business. And I thought, I actually had no other option. This was not like this exciting opportunity for me. This was like at a point where I had to pay rent in Dublin, and it was that, or there was no alternative. So I spent 3 years helping to build a performance nutrition brand, and that turned out to be the most valuable experience in my life, for so many reasons. Because it was the start of a concept, and all I had was a computer in front of me, and it was everything from writing the labels, formulating the products, looking at the size of the tubs, other brands. You were doing everything from product development, execution, to then you had to actually sell the product.
Yeah, that's a brilliant experience.
Absolutely incredible. And at the time, I thought that it was the greatest punishment. And I also thought I was going to be tarnished in the industry. I'd never get a job in sport. But when, as time went on, I realized the access that I had to that industry allowed me to communicate with athletes on a whole different level.
Yeah. How so?
To this day, and probably forevermore, athletes will just inherently think that nutrition is about what supplement can be taken. I mean at a very superficial level, but it just comes up so often. because there's so much marketing, there's so much conversation in the space of sports performance about supplementation that people really don't know where it fits properly. And I was able to talk about specific quantities. Like you could talk to me about carnosine, beta-alanine, caffeine, nitrates. It did not matter. I was able to access the research in my brain because I had spent 2 years researching this. I knew how much of a potential benefit these products could have or didn't have. And what it allowed me to do was put a lot of nonsense to bed early on.
Yeah, which is huge.
In that space.
Yeah.
Rather than the conventional approach is, forget about it. And normally what is stated is that tested, is it WADA approved? Like, that's the greatest look. Like, that is irrelevant. Sorry, let me rephrase. It is absolutely relevant. It's just that if you're having a conversation about its value, an athlete is not going to value that part of the conversation.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
They want to know, is it effective?
What will it do for me?
What will it do for me? And if you can break it down and say, it will take 4 weeks to load in your system to allow you to actually feel the benefits of it in training, and you're probably talking about another 4 weeks of intensive training where you're starting to see the benefits of taking it alongside how well you're sleeping, how specific your training is, how well you're meeting all of your other nutrition demands. An athlete starts to go, okay, now I get it. Now I realize why you have to have all of these other elements in place before we consider that. If you just dismiss it, then an athlete is going to be more interested in it.
Okay, yeah. We might get into that in a little bit more, the other pillars you're talking about there, because it's said supplementation is just one small piece. Obviously, it's a sexy piece, if you like, of nutrition, but I'd be keen to talk about how you've probably developed and what you've learned over the years. I'm just conscious, before we pull away from this, we're talking, how long are we talking here? Because there's not many industries where you go and you do a 4-year degree, then you go and do a year's master's, and there's absolutely nothing there waiting for you. Most people from a year's master's tend to go into salary jobs that are probably like middle income jobs, at least starting at 40, 50, 60 grand, maybe beyond, depending on the industry. Whereas like in what we're established here, that's far from it with this industry. Like, how many years were you dressed up as the fruit juice man, selling the fruit and like kind of doing the free work before? Because I think this is important. There'll be a lot of people listening to this podcast, maybe they're a bit older, but they have kids who are they're telling their kids to follow a passion. And I think it's important people here, if you want to follow your passion, great, but just be prepared to do a lot of work that you're not necessarily passionate about to get there first.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I was, let me see, nearly 2 years. It was a year and a half, nearly 2 years of doing lots of different types of odd jobs. And then I went into that brand. The brand was ROS Nutrition for 3.5 years. So I suppose by when I started college to when I started in an actual job that's a performance nutritionist is 10 years.
Yeah, like that's a long journey.
It is a long journey. It is a long journey. And if I'm being quite honest about it, it was all about timing as well, because it could have been another 3 years if that position had been taken within Leinster. So it was just purely, I was in the right mindset. I had enough experience. I was able to execute under pressure when I was asked about how I was going to add value to Dublin and Leinster. When those questions were asked, I wasn't ready before then. That's the bottom line. And this is the next really important point. It took me a long time to really sharpen my skills to the point where I could be very effective in those environments too. Okay. It's not just getting in there. It's actually understanding the demands physically and mentally that those athletes and those athletes are in, and what that feels like day to day and week to week. And that takes the time, and not everybody is able for the pressure of that. So there's two different things here. There's actually, do you want to work in the space, but are you also cut out to work in it? And that's not about me being great. That's just an actual reality of it, because when I got into Leinster, I was in on a 20-hour contract doing.
Was this the first? Did you get the Leinster role before the Dublin role?
No, sorry, Dublin first. 6 weeks later, I got the Leinster job.
Okay, well, and they were both, I suppose, part-time roles that you were able to.
Both part-time roles.
Yeah. Obviously, both what at the very least you call as a high performance or high demand environment. When you got in there in the initial stage, obviously, because you're in the learning phase there for both straight away. Was there much of a difference between the two? Like, obviously, the obvious one would be the IRFU, essentially, or Leinster Rugby is professional, whereas like I know Dublin, it's as close to professional as probably can be in an amateur point. But like, was there major differences between both, or was it an athlete by athlete approach and it didn't matter too much?
Yeah, they're both athlete by athlete approaches, and I think this is the thing that I pride myself on. Everybody's on a separate, everybody's in a different journey and in a different path, and it's about identifying what are the barriers for people and what are the priorities for people. But they are so different culturally. They're so different because there's money involved. They're so different because amateur athletes and GA athletes are there for very much, it's their commitment. It's what that's what they've done. There's a love of the game. Whereas in professional sport, the stakes are so high day to day, week to week. There has to be phases of it built in to have downtime because the pressure is so high. It's actually really only since I left, 18 months ago or whenever, I don't know exactly how many months it is now, but, since I left that I realized just how much it's in your system. It never leaves your system. Even if you're on a holiday or you're on a break, you're still thinking about the demands of that job.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing your job as well as you can. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. It's did you find it with both entities, or was it more so just because of the professional element of the rugby side of things? Did that just add the whole edit? Like,
I don't think it's just about it being like Dublin and Leinster are very, like, they're so similar in ethos and so similar in demand for the highest standards in the world and the way they approach their training, their preparation. I can't emphasize that enough. But when you're being paid to do a job to ensure that the athletes are put in a position consistently, week after week, month on month, year on year, to win back-to-back titles, there's just an extra layer to it. It's almost hard to define unless you've been in that environment. But it's also a drug, like it's also incredibly addictive, and you're just so driven to try and find ways for you to add value all the time. I can't, like, they're both absolute dream jobs.
Yeah. And like within the environment, so, because I know, as you said, it is a harder thing to articulate. When you say you add value, the actual, just to get an idea of the work that you do, are you just responsible for the senior squads of both players? Are you involved with underage? Are you linking in with other coaches? How does that actually look? And how many people are you responsible for in both setups, roughly?
Yeah, so I'll start with Leinster. Initially, it was academy, sub-academy, academy, and then senior. There's 45 athletes, senior athletes. There's 20 in the academy, and then there would be another 10, 15 in the sub-academy. That changed after about 3 years. So I was in Leinster for nearly 10 years. After about 3 years, there was an academy, part-time academy nutritionist came on board to help out with the academy role. With Dublin, it was usually the senior squads, and that over the course of the year, it's between 35 and 40. And then I suppose a question you have asked that's really important is that when you're a backroom team member, a lot of your time, at least 50% of your time, is spent communicating with other backroom team members. Like, you are very much connected as a backroom team. You are a team. It's not like you're not working in isolation. So if an athlete is injured, an athlete is a priority, you've got every element around, like every pillar is around that athlete. You've got your physiotherapist, you've got your S&C coach, your strength and conditioning coach, you've got your medic, the doctor might be there. If he's a forward, you'd have the forward coach. You're putting every pillar around that athlete in order to facilitate their, whatever that goal is. If they're injured or if they're identifying a specific goal that they're working on. now that we're talking about, you're asking about the difference. I think ultimately time and structure and process can be far more streamlined if you're in work at 7:30 in the morning, and then there's other people who are in since 5 o'clock in the morning. But if you're in there from then till 4 o'clock, it allows you to put those type of meetings in place consistently. That's kind of what I'm talking about. But that creates an intensity, and that ultimately that's what drives constant improvement.
Okay. And with both scenarios, you're working with the players, I'm sure, on an individual basis. I'm sure there's some sort of group work that you do with the guys as well. And then, as you said, then a lot of time is spent working with the backroom staff. In terms of match days and going, obviously Leinster travel all over Europe depending on the competition they're playing in, and then Dublin be all over the country. Would you travel with the teams? Would you do some of that as well? Or are you generally kind of, I'd say office-based in inverted commas here, but would you have done much travel with the teams along the way?
Yeah, I travelled everywhere with Dublin, and I definitely identified that on the road there was opportunities to just make sure the little things were covered and that the right liquid was in the right bottle and the right things were on the fuel table and all of those things. Like even I've talked an awful lot about even identifying the Mayor Ishka, like the water boy position, as a major opportunity for making sure that the athletes were hydrating well and picking up little things like the distances that, the intensities that they were covering, and it's unbelievable when you're at a match just how much more that you can absorb. Just even seeing the behaviors of the substitutes and how they were warming up, were they hydrating, what was happening at half time. So there's an awful lot in it. Like there really is an awful lot.
It doesn't strike me like you were doing two 20-hour jobs a week. I'm not going to be honest here.
No, and no. At one stage, I would have said that I was doing somewhere between 80 and 90 hours comfortably.
Yeah.
But when you're totally, I don't like the word obsessed, but I was totally obsessed with my jobs and loved it. Leinster was very different. I was part-time in there, which meant if I was traveling, I was on a 20-hour contract. If I was traveling across Europe and across England, I wouldn't have been able to do my job at Dublin. It's not that the role wasn't needed, but long before that I was there was a lot of processes put in place for a game day, and you've got your kit man that's setting up the room, and so it was very different. Now there's a guy in there, Owen Hickey, and he's traveling with the team and he's doing that, but it's evolved into a full-time role, and that was one of the key things that we knew needed to change.
Okay. Are you linking in with, say, like hotels and restaurants and
all
stuff?
The time.
Yeah, I remember seeing a really interesting one before. I think Liverpool came over to play a friendly here, and it was a guy trains with me. His brother's involved in one of the hotels, and I got to see the email that gets sent and the list of requirements that they have to do. Like something so simple was absolutely no shellfish is allowed just because of the obviously it's healthy food, but it's just the risk of potential food poisoning that could wipe out a squad. Like there's incredible detail that goes in. When I was reading it going, holy hell, there's a lot in this. Like,
yeah, and it depends on whether it's a camp or whether it's after a game or if it's on the way to a game. Like you need to have that detail to avoid any kind of potential issues. Like the one thing is you have a very strict process, and familiarity and clarity on what works and what's effective and what the players are comfortable with is really important. And the reality is when it comes to food, that normally there's this amazing creative license that chefs have. They can't have that when it comes to performance nutrition. And it's not that it shouldn't taste good, that it absolutely should. But a pasta and chicken can look very different depending on who's cooking it. So it's trying to create, and the communication around that and keeping that as consistent as possible is absolutely massively important part of it.
And then the work you actually do specifically with each athlete, is it like, do you basically design a diet and they get handed their foods that they follow and it's really rigid and they don't think anything about it? Or are you giving them certain guidelines, whether it's calorie requirements, protein requirements that they're trying to hit on a daily basis? Or is it just trying to educate them on food groups that they kind of bring in, which is maybe a little bit more loose?
I'm glad you teed up that question, actually, for people who are listening, not necessarily from a sports performance perspective, because it's really simple. The whole thing and the whole process is really simple. And ultimately what you're trying to do is to get people to think as much as possible about how nutrition and the foods and drinks that people consume can impact how they feel and their energy levels and how they recover. And if you prescribe these things, and if you just have people tracking, or these foods are handed to them, they're not making those connections.
No, definitely not. Yeah.
And that's a big problem in the world today. People are eating out of petrol stations. They're eating, whatever sandwiches are in the canteen. They're buying ready-made meals. And there was an awful lot of talk, particularly about Dublin. And I remember being down in Galway one day. And I was after playing a game of golf and I was having a pint, and somebody was in the bar, started talking about this delivery van that was going to all of the Dublin players' houses with their meals every day.
Right.
And this thing went around, and you just
it
laugh
wasn't
at
true.
it.
Like it
wasn't true. I mean, the whole point was that the more control you have yourself over what you are eating, and that involves cooking and preparing it, the more confidence, but also the more confidence you have in that process, but also you know exactly what you're eating. And there's a whole different mindset approach to that versus somebody hands it to you. So I really emphasize that. And even when sometimes the management were encouraging this, that if the players didn't have to cook, they'd have more time for analysis or whatever it might be, that I said, this is a strict part of what I believe to be very important. And it's not that players couldn't take takeaways or have meals. It's just that if an athlete is not thinking about it, then they're not in as much control about it. And there's too much room for error.
Yeah, I like it. I suppose the way I probably summarize is, are you prescribing or are you educating? And I said, I can understand someone who's not educated in this field. I'll just prescribe them, give them what they need, one less thing to stress about, one less thing to worry about. And that's the simplistic view. But I said, you see the bigger picture here. And unless we educate these guys, it's just not going to work. It'll work for small periods at different times. But the bigger scheme here is we need to educate and empower these guys to make these decisions themselves. Yeah.
And that's a series of small conversations in corridors, and when you're having coffees or on the way to the bus or on the bus on the way to games and all of that type of thing. And don't get me wrong, it is absolutely highly strategic. And yes, we do talk about grams of protein in recovery, but not all the time.
Yeah, it goes way beyond that.
It goes way beyond that. And I think that's, I'm not going off on one with the whole the tracking approach, but it's the depth of detail around what influences our food choices day to day and putting structure that works in our lives that matters. Not if it fits our macros.
Definitely. Look, I'd love to get into that probably in the work you're doing currently, because I think that's an absolutely fascinating subject, and it's something I'm day to day banging my head against the wall off with the lads I work with and Bulletproof Dad. So we'll definitely go there. I suppose a question I'd have, just more curious as a sports fan, when the players get on board, like again, I know from the gym, we've our WhatsApp groups and stuff like that, the lads would make meals or share recipes and stuff like that. Like, would you have certain players that would be good like that, maybe in either dressing room, who are big into their cooking, or maybe is there kind of a collab effort amongst the players that maybe if there's a bit of buy-in, would they share recipes among each other and try and support each other? I had this or I had that, or is it heavily individualized?
Oh no, there was a very much a collective attitude that there's a value in this, and there was a huge amount of fun, and there was a social aspect of it. And what you just described was like one of the most fulfilling aspects, is where you're just creating a platform for this exchange and for this experience. And nothing made me happier than seeing players going for coffee together, going for dinner together, but mostly, if they did cook in each other's homes, like that's it. That's putting it all together. And I used to love doing that as well. Like I was very fortunate or unfortunate to live with Sean O'Brien for over 3 years. He's an international athlete. He's a Lion, and he's become one of my closest friends. And
to be honest, of any rugby player, he was probably one of the best athletes involved. For the size and the shape of him, he's incredible. The pace he had and the power he had, he's beyond your average athlete.
And he's beyond your average person too, because what I witnessed with him was that his mind was equally as impressive as the body that he was in. And I don't say that lightly. Like, his grit and his bounce back ability, the stuff that I saw he put himself through. But that wasn't the point I was bringing up. It was more, you really start to see when you put something in front of somebody as like nutrition as a concept or a tool to help somebody perform, and they start to see it, what they're willing to do and the attention they're willing to give it, that's what I absolutely loved. You know, you start to see somebody who goes, I want to be the top of my game. I want to be in the best possible shape. I'm willing to do the work. And that they could see that chopping peppers was part of that process.
Okay, yeah.
And like, that's not somebody else's job. I'm willing to do that.
Yeah. Which is probably becoming rarer and rarer as sport gets more professional, I would imagine. Like, I could be completely wrong and we can't really talk about it, but I imagine most professional footballers in the UK, for example, I can't imagine most of them chopping peppers in the kitchen.
No.
Could be wrong, but it'd be very hard to see.
No, and look, there's a massive range, but I know that I have colleagues and friends who work in the Premier League, and I know a lot of them deal with chefs, and it's not even the player, and there's an awful lot. You talked about the prescription aspect.
It seems to be the way. Yeah.
It seems to be a large part of it, and but there's a massive cultural difference too between rugby and GAA and soccer, and just, I mean, look at the difference in the money. It's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But
Have any of the lads say you're involved with whether the rugby or the GAA, who would you most like to, if someone was offering you to come over for dinner, who would you most like to cook you a meal? Was there anyone in particular that was very good at cooking?
At cooking?
Yeah. Anyone that put really good recipes out there of all the guys?
Yeah, in Leinster, Rhys Ruddock was phenomenal. Like, he was a guy who was so centered as a person as well. Like, you know, there was large periods of frustration as well with players would be very quick to tell you if they didn't like something. You know, and I worked really hard to try and keep things fresh in menus and things like that. But like, you'd get as much negative feedback as
and that can be hard to take when you're all in on something and pouring your heart into something. It is tough to take.
No, it is. And like, sometimes things would happen where there'd be logistical things that would happen around ordering and menus and the wrong food turning up, and it wouldn't be your fault at all. But like, you're the food guy, so you got it. But anyway, Rhys was that guy who, he just seemed so measured, and like, if you wanted to have the crack, you could have the crack, but when you wanted to dial it in, you could dial it in. And you know, he was one of these people who can make extremely impressive meals and salads and things like that. But the amazing thing when you ask that question is that they can all do it. They can all do it, but it's the kind of the real interest in making something very creative. That's a different type of question. And then they get a little bit competitive about it too.
I can imagine.
Yeah. No, they most definitely do. And there's an excitement. But I love that. I loved watching that evolution. Paul Mannion, of course, is a guy who very, very, very professional in the way that he always approached his preparation, but he moved more towards a plant-based nutrition approach and was vegan for quite some time. I actually did a case study on him as part of my studies. And that was fascinating because when you move towards a predominantly plant-based approach, you have to be an excellent cook to make the vegetables and proteins taste really good.
Were you involved? Were you working with him at the time? Were you involved? Can I ask, like, were you supportive of that decision? Did you try to talk him out of it? Or
I absolutely tried to talk him out of it. Absolutely. And that only added, he went fucking bananas. He was like, I'll show you, I'll prove you wrong. And, but that's not an unusual thing to happen when you challenge an athlete.
Okay, yeah.
They will try and prove you wrong. And by God, like, some of the stats that he came back with, like, we measured all of his stats that year and we looked at it more closely, but he knew we were looking at it more closely. So he put more effort into his preparation.
This is the question. Yeah. There's more to it than just the one thing going
of course
on.
There is.
Yeah,
of course there is.
Yeah.
But it's not that he didn't make mistakes. Like, he did make certain mistakes, and it's harder to meet all those nutrition needs. And you, particularly as an athlete, you rely more on supplementation. But credit to him.
What, like, supplementation wise, would he be looking at? Was it like pea protein shakes or plant based? Like,
yeah. So you really have to go after things like, obviously B12, even things like zinc and magnesium, you got to look at a little bit closer. Omega-3, I don't know if I mentioned, but that's important. And then the obvious one for him was that he did need to supplement with protein, and he was using an awful lot of, he was using an awful lot of things like pulses and beans and lentils, which have a huge amount of fiber, which can cause more bloating and digestive issues.
Which is not what you want, particularly pre-game as a fuel.
Exactly what happened at times. So those are the type of things that we need to manage.
Cool. So, like for me, this is a lovely story in the sense that like you got your qualification, pursued your passion, you had to do your hard time of getting to where you want to get the dream jobs that you did, working with these incredible athletes and having fantastic success in both, like two of the most successful sporting teams around for both. Like it's incredible to be part of that. When did the decision come for you that, right, it's now time to take the next step, come away from all this and actually go out on my own and start my own thing?
Well,
because to me, as someone who studied this and is really into this, you were at the top of the ladder, you know? And then it's like, maybe, I don't know, the logical things, you might have got a job in the UK, talking about professional football or something like that, where it's a higher salary or something like that because there's more money involved.
And look, that's what I thought was going to happen. Yeah. I thought, when I started out, and I thought, it's not that you don't think about these things, you just don't really want to think about them. And I can't tell you, like right up until the last day that I left both of those roles, they were everything that I could have wanted. I absolutely loved my jobs. But there's a really important question that I continually asked myself, and that is, who do I want to be, and what do I want to do with my life, and what do I want to achieve? And a couple of times at different stages, you see things change, and the environment changes, and then being brutally honest as well, when you're in an environment for a prolonged period of time.
How long were you there? Sorry, just as
almost 9 years with Dublin, and then nearly 10 years with Leinster.
That's a long time in professional sport.
Yeah.
It mightn't sound that long in other careers, but think about it. There's definitely turnover, a few managers in there and staff and a lot of players. Yeah, Joe
Schmidt was there when I started, and Leo and Stuart when I left. But I only I worked with predominantly worked with Jim Gavin in Dublin, and then just Desi for one season. But I think I want to go back to the point that maybe isn't talked about an awful lot, and that is that no matter how good you are, no matter who you are, there is a little bit of fatigue that will set in, and your voice starts to lose that little bit of effect. And, I can talk an awful lot about it was the right time for me to move on, but there's also the reality that everybody has their time. It doesn't matter who you are. And
I think Jurgen Klopp is probably a very good relevant example at the moment. He's obviously said he's tired. 8 years at the top, he's done now. He's taking a break when he's still achieving massive success. It's taking a few people by surprise.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that a big part of it as well is I constantly challenge myself, and you can't. I wanted to run my own business, and I felt like there was something there that I wanted to do, that I wanted to achieve, that I wanted to feel completely autonomous in how I delivered a message. And if you're involved in elite sport, you can't do that completely. So it was there's a gut instinct, and then there's those hard questions that you ask yourself, and then you move on. Yeah.
And can you remember when you announced, or whatever the best way to describe it is, that you were going to leave the roles? Can you remember what the initial feedback was, maybe particularly from close friends and family? Were they surprised?
Well, Dublin was a little bit different. I suppose to say that there was a change in the guard there, and Desi was freshening things up, and that was a different type of conversation that I had. Like, he was asking me about my time commitment and was I able to give more, and the reality of it was that I wasn't. So it was, he had a decision to make.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, that was a challenging enough sort of conversation. Actually, I haven't talked about this before, but and I have absolutely no problem talking about it. But that was the type of conversation we need more because we have just been beaten. I'm not able to deliver more. And that's kind of, well, that answers that.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing else to really be said.
There's nothing really else to be said. Dublin, so that was Dublin. And then Leinster is different. Like I went in and I spoke to them and I just said, I feel like this is the right time, but I'm going to do everything I possibly can to put really good succession planning in place and the right person coming back in. I feel like that has been so positive as my connection there is still so strong. And I just love that because you don't get that opportunity to do that very often.
How long was that notice or succession period?
6 months.
Okay, yes. There's a lot of work going in there. Yeah.
No, there was. And there was a lot of change in that time period. And I would have asked athletes that I would have a lot of respect for and, I would consider friends, help me make the absolute most of this last period so I can do the best I can. So that was really positive. The friends question and the family question is a little bit different. The support was absolutely there, and I probably was talking about it for quite some time, but everybody knew how hard it was going to be to make that final move when they knew how much I loved those positions. But when they know me and they know I want to do other things and I want to achieve different things, and there's, I've written recipe books and there's other challenges I want to establish. That's that. But I actually did, before I left the position, I'm not going to lie, there were the thoughts, would I be taken as seriously, or would people would have the same respect for me because I'm not in those roles anymore?
The association.
Without those associations,
the
big associations with I don't talk to Johnny Sexton every day anymore, or I'm not talking to Kieran Kilkenny and Brian Fenton anymore. And do people still value my opinion? But ultimately what you got to do is make the right call for you in your own head and what you're trying to achieve, and you kind of keep going back to that self-talk.
And you're a father as well, so you've 2 young children.
That was a massive part
had you both children born at this stage when you decided to do this, or
one little girl at that point?
Yeah, so you say it's a big thing for you, but there is a whole other layer to this as well. Like, you're leaving a secure income that you're quite good at and have you've a lot of status with it as well. It's not just your average job. And you're leaving that, and I said, you have to think about it's not just you anymore. You have a whole family to think about here as well. So it's a huge call to make, and that's just why I want to talk about it, because I think a lot of people probably wouldn't have had the guts to do it, but obviously you felt something within your gut that said, no, this is the right time to do it. And I'm just kind of wondering, was it as straightforward as that, or was it these little questions you had, which I think are just perfectly normal?
Yeah,
because you're kind of leaving a certain role to an extent, going out into the uncertain. And something I'm conscious of here as well, you go out on your own. I'm self-employed now 12 years, so I probably still have the same thought every day. Geez, I should probably just jack this in and get a normal job. It'd be a lot less easier. It probably crosses my mind at least once a day, probably 10 times a day if I'm honest. But there's obviously something there that keeps pulling you back in. But I'm conscious with you. I'm kind of numb to a lot of it now because I've been doing it, and I've been able to take a team on the last couple of years. But you've literally gone from a huge extreme of part of these massive teams to then step out on your own. Was there a time a couple of weeks in after you kind of took the step where you're I'd imagine you're leaving WhatsApp groups, for example, that were maybe the most important WhatsApp group you were probably in, bar your family one, for the last decade or so. Was there a time where you're going, when it felt real, after you maybe took the step a couple of weeks later, where you're like, shit, I'm on my own here? Was there any sort of landing like that, or did it kind of feel...
I'm having a bit of an outer body experience right now as you're asking the question, because I think what you do is you have to just commit, because they're such big decisions. You say what you need to say, and then you move on. And I think as you're asking it, and I was processing the questions and I was thinking about those emotions, I think it was probably 6 months after I'd left, because initially, I mean, I don't mean to compare it to death or something, but there's that kind of post-traumatic type of feeling of loss. The initial part of it, I was definitely really well prepared for. We were talking about 6 months, particularly with Leinster, where I had the long goodbye kind of thing. With about 6 months pass, and you're extremely busy, totally focused on making the next thing work and trying to figure shit out. And then there was a period I can really distinctly remember around Christmas time where I felt like there was this massive hole. You know, there's something really missing here that I need to fill.
So this would have been just over a year ago. So
yeah. About 6 months after I finished, and I had a good bit of processing to do. And what I actually decided, because I kept thinking, this has been really honest. Like, I kept thinking, I've been in those roles for this long. Surely the world will be interested in me. I mean, even the fact that now that I'm not in those roles, you know, surely there are some teams that might be interested in my experience.
Yeah.
Nobody called.
Okay, yeah.
You know, there's like people would say, you know, I'm sure you're inundated now. I'm like, yeah. I'm not one, you know?
Yeah.
There's people will call, don't get me wrong, to do team talks, and you might, you know, do corporate talk.
Gigs
or
as
like
opposed
to to roles. And that showed me an awful lot about just, I suppose, where the reality of where I was at now. And there is nobody else going to come and call. So I made a big call in my head, and this was really important. This was pivotal, like really, really, really important. I decided to let all of that go, and I decided to just commit my time to exploring areas that really interested me and that excited me in 2023. So I decided to kind of take the pressure off all of that stuff, like, because you're always asked what's the next thing or who's it going to be, and just decide to leave all that to one side. And some absolutely amazing things, like absolutely incredible things, happened for me in 2023. And I don't mean commercially, or I don't mean, oh, would you believe, like, this person called Rory McIlroy was ringing, or I don't mean anything like that. It was more about my clarity.
What were the areas you decided to pursue? What were the real interesting areas that you wanted to double down on for 2023, so that maybe you didn't get the chance to when you were involved in the team sport?
I'm fascinated about people's journey and mindset and how they approach things. And what I wanted to do is to put a really good pathway together for people to achieve goals. It doesn't matter what that goal is, but it's in the space of health and performance. And we spent hours and hours and hours talking about what that would look like and what that would feel like. And we came up with a philosophy with, you know, with key elements in it: understanding who you are, where you are, what you want to achieve, then creating a winning game plan, reflecting on that game plan, building your community, building that clarity and confidence. And that's actually what the outcome started to really listen to the people we were working with, and we started to realize that what differentiates us as a team and as professionals is that we help people with that clarity and confidence. They're the words we started hearing back. So I suppose one of the key moments that happened in 2023 was I decided to take a big leap and do a public talk in Dublin, in Untapped in last April. It's just a little, like, just the old, what's gone out of my head now? An old nightclub is closed down. It's Tapped as the place. Oh, what the hell was it? It'll come back to me.
Whereabouts in Dublin was it?
At the bottom of the old Lilies. The old Lily hotels. Yeah, so it's upstairs. Like,
a few lads nodding their head listening to this podcast going, oh yeah, remember that place?
So upstairs in the old Lilies. And the whole thing was about finding a higher path, asking questions about who you were, and it was definitely not about yogurt and protein, and it was this kind of concept and introducing it to the world. And I found it really hard to sell tickets. Like, it was really tough to sell tickets, but sold maybe 40 tickets, and I was delighted some friends came. And I remember starting to introduce this, my team were at the top, and we started introducing this concept about looking at things differently. and this type of exploratory questioning of who you are and in identity and looking at identity, because it was the big thing for me. Like, it was the big thing that changed, was I started to think about who I was and who I wanted to be. And I could see the heads dropping. I was going, oh my God, I'm fucked. I'm like, oh my God. Like, I have done so many public speaking roles.
Yeah.
This is the first time I was taking this massive leap. And the little, the voices in your head was like, it's okay. You can talk about eggs. You can talk about how many eggs you can eat a day. It's, you've got the safety net.
Yeah.
And I got through the first hour and like, I was, the sweats. And
was this just in your head, or could you feel the vibe in the room?
I felt both.
Yeah.
Because people came thinking this is Daniel Davey, who laughs and jokes about making smoothies and, and I felt a bit of like, I was asking questions of the audience as well. And it was tough going. And then I got through to the halfway point and took a bit of a break and talked to the team. And it was it was one of those moments. And I mean it very sincerely. It really was. It's like, are we actually going for this now? Are we actually going to commit to this, or are we just going to go keep doing what we're doing? Go back to the idea of protein distribution. And I said, fuck, let's go for it. And I went for it. I started again, but I started like with a completely different energy.
Yeah, you went after it.
I went after it. And I remember finishing the evening, thanking everybody, and just this unbelievable relief. And everybody was leaving. And this man came up to me and he said, you're onto something here. He said, I reckon you're probably somewhere between 10 and 20 years ahead in terms of what people are comfortable with or used to. He says, I think you're onto something. He said, here's my card. He said, I own a corporate business with a franchise. And he said, I'd love to talk.
Fantastic, yeah.
I had 3 conversations with him, and following on from that, built a high performance program that I'm still currently delivering.
Cool. Just to come back on that, I think the word that's screaming out to me here is values, and you're quite clear in your values. And I actually read a really good quote on values, I think it was yesterday, about in business we talk about values all the time, but what does it actually mean? And I heard a great summary. It's like it's what you're willing to turn money down for. It's a great summary if you kind of break it down.
Yes.
So yeah, these are my values, but then you'll often hear people say, this is what I'm about, but then you get you could have gone in there and been the people pleaser and done the egg thing and the protein thing. People would have got what they wanted and gone off, and then you'd probably get good feedback. You do another seminar, and no, it becomes a good revenue stream for you. But like that, it's not the fulfilling thing that you've left that behind. You need to go after this now, because there's definitely something in there that's made you leave these incredible roles that you've worked so hard to get to. And I think this is a really poignant moment. I just love how you summarized that there. And it's great that there's a good lesson there from me, that you're true to your values and someone is actually there to support you. And like, obviously that never would have happened if you played it safe. So there's a big leap of faith with that as well, which I think is pretty cool. So to talk about that program now, can we just go into a little bit more detail? Because maybe some of our listeners here might be guilty of the same thing of thinking, oh, Daniel Davey on a podcast, I'll listen now, I'll find out now. He might have a few tips on protein or the perfect smoothie. Can we go and talk a little bit more about this work? Because maybe some people are hearing this for the first time. Like, what is it, this sort of work that you're doing? If you're tapping into people's values and their vision, how does that actually look or break down?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it starts by beginning to understand initially the person, and what they're looking to achieve. And very often when people come to work with me, it's like you asked the question, they'll either have heard something, that triggered a thought on Instagram, or that I've been associated with the sports teams. I think I'll kind of go back to something that I began to recognize once I left Dublin and Leinster that became very apparent. And that is that when you're within really highly successful environments, there's a very clear vision. I mean, it's so clear what you're working towards. And it goes beyond, and this is the real beauty of it, it goes so far beyond just what happens at the end of the season and the cups that you have and the All-Irelands that you have. there's a greater sense of purpose. And I know this is talked about an awful lot, but I felt that. I felt what it was like to be a part of, inspiring the youth of or the future, but also connection to the past and what was gone before. I was a part of that all the time. Anyway, I leave Leinster, I leave Dublin, and I started to realize, geez, people are not connected to anything. People come with a goal of reducing body fat or building muscle or, completing a marathon in a better time. They don't really think about a vision for their overall life. And that is what I do. Like the whole thing is, how do you live your life day to day for better health and performance? But who are you going to be at 60 or 70 or 80 and work back from that? Because if you put a process in place that allows you to live a really high performing life, then the marathons and the body composition goals and the high roxes and all of those, they're just little points along the way. And people don't think about those things. And they also do not think about what's driving their decisions. So very often stress and frustration, and very sadly, I see a lot of this, loneliness is driving an awful lot of people's bad habits. When you start to peel the layers back, people start to realize, holy shit, it's nothing to do with, the takeaway at the weekend. It's nothing to do with it. It's actually how I'm feeling. There's something missing. And, there's I shouldn't be laughing, but no amount of protein is filling that feeling.
Definitely, yeah. It's a great way of putting it, yeah. And like I'm kind of smiling listening to this. I was like, Jesus Christ, I just came to this fella to find out what calories and protein I should be having for my marathon training. And then you're coming back with this questionnaire. Like, I'm sure I can imagine you, because of your background, that's probably the best way to describe it, that I would associate you working with high performing athletes. So if I consider myself a high performing athlete, I'm coming to you and I want that little extra bit, that thing. So I'm probably in a hurry, in a rush to get where I want to get to, and I want that next little piece of the jigsaw. So I'd imagine you can get a lot of pushback with that, and maybe initial frustration because people are looking for the quick and dirty tip that's going to get them there. And you're coming back, rather than coming back with an answer straight away, it's essentially a flood of questions that is taking them away from that narrow mindset to open their mind and see what they want. So that is incredibly challenging, I would imagine.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's really, really challenging. But, when you have people coming back telling you that this whole process has changed their lives, changed their relationships with their family members, with their partners. I have people who've changed careers off the back of the questions because they realize that the source of unhappiness is, who they're spending time with during the day. Definitely. Things begin to really change. And, I have some really, really sad stories too, where people come to you looking to better understand how to get more out of their training and how to reduce their body fat. And you ask them some of these questions about who they want to be, and they're really emotional, and they turn around to you and you're saying, you're asking me to answer the toughest question that, I'm not willing to ask myself. And I turn back to them and say, unless you're willing to answer those questions, you're never going to be happy. You're never going to actually feel how you want to feel, because all of these little things are connected, and your system will feel that. Your energy, your mindset, all of these things are connected. And I suppose that's the real confidence that I've got. And what puts me in a really unique position is that I've seen how when these things are connected, when you have people's minds in the right place, when you see people's nutrition, day-to-day practices, their sleep is in a really good place. So all of these little things are very, very clearly aligned, and that there's, that there's a real sense of calm and clarity. And but like you mentioned fun, that people are enjoying it.
Yeah.
Because it's actually then the music happens.
I speak to a lot of like I said, in terms of personal trainers, of the more golden generation now, because I'm 12 or 13 years doing it. Most people do it for a few years and then tend to disappear with the industry. It tends to eat a lot of people up. So I speak to younger personal trainers and like trying to explain to them like the work you're trying to do with people, and it's how you learn over time, because again, you're all in at the start. It's about, like, most clients come for a weight loss goal or a body composition goal. And I suppose what I've found over the years is, and this would really back up what you're saying there, is I find clients at the start can be very good and do really well because they're often in a position of discomfort or unhappiness. So their initial goal is to get away from something. So they want to get away from that feeling or that look, whatever it is. And they'll get to a certain point where they're kind of happy. And then it's kind of, they've gotten away from what they've wanted to get away from. And now the next step is, okay, I want to do this. I want to go to this. I want to get my body fat to this level. I want to be able to do this. And they never really can take the next step. They tend to kind of hover in the middle, because realistically, if we break it down, they don't have a clear reason why. I'm going to do this because it's the next thing I should do, or I should probably go for this or do that. But there's no absolute clarity or real vision as to what they're doing. So they tend to kind of float between this area of happy enough to an extent versus really unhappy. And then they might slip back a little bit, and then they see that they're going back to where they were, and they'll transition, and they tend to going to be stuck in this limbo. That's just something I found. Now I'm doing this a long time.
Yes.
So they can be great clients because they can get away from where they want to get to, and it makes a great transformation and a really good story. But the best clients I find are lads who have a bigger vision, and it's actually, they train because they want to just be feeling good or performing at a high level. They link training and good sleep and good nutrition with their work performance, with how they are at home, how they manage stress, how they are as a person. And when you can join all those dots, you've won. Whether you're fucking 10% body fat or 20% body fat, that's what I find. But so many people struggle to join those dots.
And that's why the question around values are so important. And that's why it's, I wouldn't have had a clue yet. You mentioned values to me when I was in my 20s. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? But as you go on, you start to understand the depth behind a value, if sleep is a value, or if, living a healthy lifestyle at home is a value. But what I find is really, really interesting about the whole value concept is that, like, I would have found myself in our business that you have to engage your values all the time to reach the standards that you're looking to try and achieve or to evolve. So, like, I can feel, so if our whole approach is science-informed or evidence-based, like there's a really strong scientific basis. But if we're not engaging in the conversation on science, if we're not sharing papers, that slips, and it slips all the way through in our messaging. So you got to be so good at maintaining the engagement in your values, or some aspect of it slips.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And with the team you have now, like, what way does the team look? Have you many staff members with you? Like, how have you built up since starting the business?
Yeah, there's been a little bit of a phenomenal team. Absolutely. Let me start with that. Absolutely phenomenal team. And Gemma is a brilliant performance nutritionist and professional soccer player over in Bournemouth. Eva, CrossFitter, brilliant performance dietitian. Aoife is she's interning but also doing some really important work. And then I have
books you for podcasts as well.
Yeah, all of those type of things. So I have a young team of interns, and then Casper is on the IT, and then I can't forget saying my wife does gives me a lot of support as well. But my big challenge, and anybody who's in this kind of early entrepreneurial state or small business stage will identify with me when, like, I don't want to be a stepping stone. But unfortunately, a lot of absolutely great practitioners have come through.
I know what you mean, yeah.
And moved on to roles where
you're trying to build a team.
Yeah,
it's
really, really tough. Yeah. And, like, ultimately, like, anyone in my team could be snapped up, and I can't compete with some, Leinster comes looking for one of my team. I can't stop that.
I know what you mean, yeah. Yeah, it's tough, all right. Going back, looking at it now, you're nearly 18 months, 2 years into the journey?
So come July, June, July, I'll be 2 years.
Cool. When you talk about digging into the values of the when you're working with your current clients now, is there any recurring themes you're seeing with people? Like obviously it's very individual, it's based on the individual, it's very specific to each person, but is there certain patterns you're seeing? Like you mentioned there, a lot of people might be struggling, like loneliness is one I was not expecting you to say, being honest with you, but is there certain things that you're seeing in general, that there's certain patterns that maybe have stood out for you or surprised you since going down this journey?
Well, I think what I've recognized myself is that you get a little bit older and different people begin to identify with you. So like an absolute consistent pattern is people's responsibility to their children. So I have an awful lot of parents engaging with me, wanting to be better for their kids and understand more about their children's nutrition and have better practices in their homes. But the loneliness part that I'm talking about is I think it's way too easy to just blame COVID. I think it's way bigger than that. I think the digital era is the initially these people are just talking about this perfect lifestyle being presented on social media. I think it's even more than that. I think people are spending so much time engaged now on their phones and in media in general, and not as connected to people who really care about them. That there's that feeling of something being missing in an awful lot of people's lives. So I suppose when we did what I'm referring to here is like we did our event in Portugal last year. This concept is like a mini camp where we could do these nutrition sessions, and there's exercise, there's mindset, there's sleep education. But what actually emerged out of it was people actually realized that this was one of the first times that they were surrounded by people with the same mindset and care and wanted them to win, wanted them to really succeed. And I can actually, I mean, even when I'm talking about it now, there are times where I feel lonely. Like
it's running your own business is an incredibly lonely journey at times. Like it is, like any entrepreneur will probably tell you that. Like even ones with big teams as well. Yeah,
I would actually go and say that even on I have an amazing family and I have great friends. But what has happened? Maybe my friends would actually be critical of me now. If I think about it, maybe they would say, "Well, you need to engage us more." But I have really found. And I think this happens with a lot of people with young families and running their own businesses, that all you do is try to be as good a parent as you possibly can and work.
There's not much time left for
anything else. There's not much time left for anything. So what I see a lot of people coming to me now wanting to reinvest in themselves and trying to figure out how to do that effectively.
Yeah, and I think like the age bracket we are as well, like we'd be similar age demographic as well. I think a lot of things you have in common with your friends when you're younger and you spend a lot of time together, you don't have the time or energy to be doing that anymore as well. So that can kind of cut ties as well. It's quite tough. Like often it's funny, like I'm talking to some mates, like just, it could be a WhatsApp over and back. And it's like, when's the next wedding or the next stag? Or so I'll see you at that. And there's none actually going, geez, maybe we should try and, or it's a kid's party, you know, like it's a big event now where it's kind of bringing people together, if even. And it's, it's a strange, because again, you grow up with your crew, if you like. And then I said, it's an interesting journey. Have you, how do you strike that balance? This would be kind of my final question on you, because I think it's a really important theme of the podcast. How do you try to strike that balance between being the present dad at home, but also being the businessman who can provide for his family as well? Because I think that's the thing I struggle with most. I absolutely agree with you. At times I can be a poor friend or not as present as I probably should be to some of my friends, because you're so engaged in what you're doing. You can't be all things to everybody. But as you said, fatherhood and running your own business will always probably be top of the pile. How do you balance those two?
I'm working on it. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm absolutely happy with the type of way that like there's things that you will do really well. There's things that I will do really well. I am really proud of the fact that I try cook and to prepare meals with my 3-year-old, and that's a really important aspect of how we engage. I pick her up from creche, which I'm already conscious of. I pick her up from creche.
That's where I'm going straight after this as well.
Straight after this, I'm going to pick her up. I pick my girls up from creche nearly every day, drop them to creche nearly every day. And I think the answer that I want to say with full commitment is that we create better and better boundaries. And I think that there's even more within the boundaries. Like when I'm pushing somebody that I'm working with, it's about detail. So it's detail in those boundaries. So between 5, so when I pick them up and when dinner is finished, there's no phones.
Yeah.
You know, it seems like such a simple thing, but there's lots of parents out there. They're another massive thing that we've introduced is way less Cocomelon.
Right, yeah.
There's way less cartoons. And we've moved, and it's absolutely incredible having moved back into our house after doing it up, how it's allowed us to change some very simple things and create more boundaries. So we have a Google Play. It's like an Alexa, but we only play music on it now.
Okay, yeah.
So my little girl she could easily watch an hour of cartoons.
Yeah, and that's an hour you could get some sneaky work done, you know, and be very productive. And she's happy, I'm happy. Brilliant.
She's quiet, but what does that do? She's way more cranky. She's way more tired. She's harder to deal with. I'm kind of getting into the more specifics about parenting, but it's trying to do things with a lot more intent. And here's one that I've picked up really, really recently. And this will sound so ridiculous. I know if anyone's listening, they'll go, what are you talking about? And that is, you know how much other parents will tell you to play with your children, right? I hate playing fucking dolls with my children. I hate it. But I have found things that I can play with. So it was torturous for me, right? And I used to hate it, and I wouldn't be engaged.
I appreciate your honesty here, because, you know, like, not everyone would be that honest to say that.
No, it was, I have no interest in playing Dollhouse. Yeah. But I have found little games that I can't believe I love now. So, like, there's cups and bricks and things like that now I will spend the first 10 minutes of the game building up with my little girl. And then it's like, now let's knock it down, you know? And it's like, let's get the balls, let's line up. And she loves it, but she loves it because how engaged I'm in it as well. So it sounds like such a simple thing, but actually finding the game that you enjoy as well as them to play with them. Yeah. So there's little bits and pieces in there, but they need air, they need good food, they need your engagement and your attention. And look, I will get phone calls and emails, and my phone I turn the notifications off as best I can and create those boundaries. No,
it's a great answer. I appreciate that. And the reason I'm asking is because I'm actually, like, that's as much me looking for advice myself as a fellow entrepreneur with 2 young kids as well, who struggles with this on a day-to-day basis, that it's something that keeps me awake at night. And I think it's a big theme of the podcast that we're trying to do. And I think I don't think we'll ever fully crack it, but there's always these little things that help. I know something so simple for me is just taking the kids swimming, because like that, the phone is in the locker, and you kind of have to watch them. It's a high danger environment as well. Yeah. But there's lovely connections there, because it's just you're there with them. Yeah. I'm not even a good swimmer myself. I don't really like swimming, but just getting in the water with them is just something I love. And it's trying to create those environments. And I think, like yourself, if you do some work from home, which we all kind of do, because we've iPhones and we've laptops at home and stuff like that, it's very hard to create those boundaries. It really is tough. Yeah, it is. Yeah. But look, hopefully that is of some sort of a solace or peace of mind for any fellow entrepreneurs or lads who struggle for that balance, or fathers as well that are listening. Yeah, I'm working with a couple of people who very recently said to me, they gave me the feedback that was outside of our kind of consultation time, and they said, you know, I've noticed that you're engaging your kids a lot more around the cooking, and they said, I've really started to do that more since I've seen it. And I think that's a very simple one. Like, my little girl absolutely loves helping. And I don't know if there's many dads, I mean, I know that the messaging around this, what I guess what I'm trying to say is that how involved they are in the cooking process at home. They should be actively involved, but that's a very simple way to engage kids. Yeah, it's a great point. Look, Daniel, I'm conscious of the time. You've given us so much value today, and I've really enjoyed this chat. I could speak to you for hours about between
too.
sports and
Yeah,
nutrition,
it's been great.
fatherhood, and everything else. Appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.